A while back, there was a Kickstarter project called Batman Gotham City Chronicles, which is a very large miniatures game by a company called Monolith. And lacking all self-control, I went all in on it. And my package came in a couple of weeks ago. I've gotten to play the game a few times. Thought I would give you my review. So it comes in the core box, comes in a couple of large boxes. This is the Hero box, which contains the hero miniatures and most of the basic game components, rules, etc. And it is the heavier box. I'm going to set that down here. And the villain box is here. This has all the villain miniatures. There's, I think, a few more of those. The box is certainly larger that contains the miniatures. And it also comes with the villains board, which I'll talk about a bit more here in a minute. Additionally, although I haven't gotten to play the expansions, I do have them. This is the Batman Wayne Manor expansion. You can see Batman holding his bat cowl outside of his mansion. And I also have the Arkham Asylum expansion, which feels like it doesn't have quite as much as there is in Wayne Manor, but one of the benefits you find in games like this is many times you aren't really wanting more miniatures so much as you're wanting more scenarios. So each of these expansions adds quite a few of those, as well as just new game mechanics through some of their rules. There's also an entirely different expansion called the Versus expansion. You can see Batman kind of attacking Killer Croc there. This one doesn't come with any miniatures or anything, though it does come with the stuff that you need to basically make it so the heroes play the same way as the villain. Normally it's a one versus mini game. The versus mode makes it so it is a direct one-on-one, which changes actually quite a bit. I haven't played it with that mode, but it looks interesting. And additionally, I don't have the box over here, but I do have the Batmobile, which is a wonderfully crafted miniature. The tires are actually made out of rubber. They don't really spin properly, so you can't like roll it across the table, which is disappointing. But the actual sculpt is beautiful. They even have red glass for the driver's seat. There is something called an arranged marriage. This is actually a mode for the villains to play as if they were heroes, and the heroes to play as if they were villains. So the one versus many gets kind of reversed, so that there are multiple villains fighting one person who's controlling the heroes using the villain dashboard, which is interesting. And that one's actually a campaign. I don't really know exactly how that works yet because I haven't played with that either, but it looks interesting. So we'll go ahead and kind of launch into what I think of the game. So to preface, I am a huge Batman fan. I admittedly have not read much of the comics, but growing up, I watched the old Adam West TV show pretty much every day as a kid. And then in the early 90s, the Batman animated series, which was obviously much better and more true to the Batman character than the Adam West series was, and really kind of defined what Batman is to me. So, like, Kevin Conroy's voice is Batman to me. Mark Hamill's Joker is Joker for me. And I just kind of view that as the definitive Batman. So this game, like, kind of appeals a little bit to that style of Batman. And it also has some allusions to the Batman Arkham Asylum games, which also had a lot of references back to the old animated series, right down to the voice actors, Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. And the Arkham Asylum expansion in particular seems to have some references to that. So as far as production goes on this game, it's just fantastic. It's drowning in miniatures, like almost too many. Like almost every significant character I would expect is in here. I think the only major one that seems to be missing is Talia al Ghul, and I guess Scarface isn't in here either for some reason. But I am hard-pressed to think of any important characters besides them that aren't in here. And there are a ton I've never heard of. I don't know who the Duke is. I'm guessing he's from some of the newer comics. but I won't go on because I'll show my ignorance with more characters I name that I didn't recognize. And there's few that come from outside of Batman proper, like Green Arrow and Black Canary. So just tons and tons of stuff in here. The miniatures are pretty high quality. So this is Batman. He has his cape kind of sweeping around, which actually, if you're not careful how you set him down on the board, he can kind of fall off balance, which is a little funny every time it happens. But really good looking miniature. Got a few more here. There's Batgirl. Let's see if I can get her up to the camera. So they liked the cape billowing out look for them. This is, I believe this is Robin. And we also have Nightwing here. So this should give you an idea of kind of like the size of the miniatures. Now, given that, if you look in the Wayne Manor box, for some reason, we have a gigantic T-Rex. Like, if I hold this and the Batmobile up next to each other, if I can arrange it around the camera properly, the T-Rex is actually larger than the Batmobile. And I think that's only used in just like a few of the Wayne Manor scenarios, not even as a playable character, just as a giant robot that can activate in the Batcave on occasion. So that's really cool. So components are great, but how good is the game? So like I said, this is a one versus mini game. It's apparently based on the Conan system that Monolith created previously. I've never played Conan. Never really had any interest in the IP. But I have played a few other one versus mini games, particularly Descent and Imperial Assault, which I think are probably the ones most people have played in the board game world. And I enjoyed Descent quite a bit. I never got into Imperial Assault, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's a good game. It just never clicked for me, even though it's a very similar system to Descent. I did always feel like Descent and Imperial Assault were always a little clunkier than they really needed to be. I couldn't really describe why. I just know I struggled a bit with actually getting into the mechanics because it always felt like they were a little fiddly, and I always felt like there was this race going on between the hero and the villain, and I couldn't just do what I enjoyed doing during a game. This game has a little bit of some of those aspects. It has some fiddly elements, and there is some element of racing between the heroes and villains. Usually the villain is trying to bog the heroes down. But in general, it feels like this one flows a little more quickly, and it's all scenario-based. It's not a campaign here in Batman. So it means that each given game feels less weighty in whether you win or lose, because you don't feel like your consequences are carrying over to other scenarios. You're just restarting from scratch every time. And I think for the way my group works, I think we enjoy that a little bit more. You don't feel like you're really committing to things over a long term. You're just kind of, hey, let's just throw some miniatures on a board, throw some dice, and see what happens. So in general, the game flows very well. It's kind of a resource-managed dice chucker, if that makes sense. So the heroes get these little energy cubes that they spend on basically every action that they do. If you want to do a melee attack, drop some cubes in to say how many dice you get for that melee attack, roll your dice, resolve that. The villain may or may not roll defense dice in response to try to cancel out your results. It's a very simple dice system. You're just counting numbers and subtracting from them. If you're doing like a range attack, you also roll dice. If you're doing a skill check, you're using dice. Movement does not require dice, but it does require energy cubes, as do the others. So pretty much what you're doing is you're kind of trying to manage your resources, which are your energy cubes, so that you don't run out when you need them, because you also use them for things like rerolls, body armor. Everything you do is energy cubes. Whether or not they involve dice, you still need those cubes. And if you run out, you just can't do anything. So there's kind of a tension. Like, do I use all my cubes on this turn and then leave myself completely vulnerable? Or do I hold some in reserve for rolling defense, and so I can have a more powerful next turn? Heroes can do either be active for a turn, or they can rest for a turn. in which case they recover more cubes, but they don't get to do anything for that turn. So they set themselves up for another turn down the line. So it's just, there's a constant tension of what do I do with my cubes, which is really, really cool, and really something you associate more with a Euro style of game than with a really thematic dice chucker. So I really like how they mixed those two things. The heroes all feel very diverse. They all have a very unique set of abilities, and they feel in the spirit of who that character is. So Batman is a tank. He just slowly rolls through a map, clobbering everybody. Batgirl, she's really, really good at hacking computers. Catwoman is very fast. She's very good for hit and run tactics. And it just, it feels like you're playing generally as these characters. And the game expects the heroes to really strategize for every scenario. If you go in without a plan and you just beat up thugs, you're going to lose, like, no question. You need to know, these are my objectives. We're saying this person handles this person handles this. I'm going to cover you, and let's get these things done, and not let the villain slow us down. So it really rewards strategy. The moment-to-moment tactics are not very complicated. It's just, hey, I'm going to do a movement here. You go fight this guy over here so that you can get him out of the way so I can move more quickly through the zone. I'll take advantage of my ability to climb faster so I can get up here and clear out these catwalks for you to advance. It's really pretty smooth how it runs once people know what they're doing. The villain is really pretty easy to run. He gets, like I said earlier, this crazy board up here. So I'm dropping tokens. So these spaces down here are what's called your river. So you're going to have tiles that sit in here that represent each of your henchmen, basically, or even the main villain. And as you use a tile from one part of the river, it will go to the back. So it's kind of a priority queue system. You can activate any tile on your river, but the things that are towards the back of your queue are going to cost you more cubes as the villain to be able to activate. So the villain also has some resource management he has to deal with. He can't just activate everybody in a given turn like the Overlord in Descent might. He has to actually pick and choose, okay, these are the groups that will be most beneficial to me to activate, and I am willing to pay whatever cost it is for them and let them go. And eventually, because of the queuing system, other units will eventually rotate in to where they'll be cheaper to activate. So your main villain, like Joker or Bane, he might be way at the back of the queue, but as the game goes on, he will get further up, so then he will get to go pretty cheaply. If you want, you can activate somebody way at the back, but you are spending a ton of cubes to do that. So the villain gets some of that same tension that the heroes do in how he spends his resources. And his turns tend to be pretty fast, which, again, is good. It keeps the game moving quickly. It's pretty difficult to get deep into analysis paralysis with this game. People have to just really, really be uncertain about what to do for that to happen. It's not going to overwhelm you with decisions, though it will give you some interesting ones to make. There are some finicky specifics to the game rules. Line of sight is not super easy to understand. Once you do kind of know what's going on, you can figure it out pretty quickly. I don't have any boards out to show you, but my favorite thing is how for confusing line of sight cases where you're like not sure if a line really gets over to this target area, they'll give you letters on the spaces, so that if there are that same letter is on both spaces, like an A and an A or a B and a B, then you know those two spaces have line of sight to each other. So that's really cool. But there are still a lot of little rules there. Elevation can be tricky. The boards actually do not tell you elevation. You can kind of intuit sometimes that something is above something else just by how the boards are drawn, because they're drawn super well. But you can't always know this is level 4 or this is level 2. And so you actually need the scenario books tell you what those elevations are. And it's kind of weird that you can't just see that on the board, that you have to actually look that up specifically. So that's kind of weird, but it works. And you kind of get used to it once you play the map enough times. You just know instinctively what the elevations are. There are a ton of skill icons. Every hero probably has like 6 to 8, and it's not really obvious just looking at the icons what they mean, so you need to be able to look them up. And every time you get a new hero, they could have different skill icons that you need to look up. If you get different equipment, those all have icons that you need to know. At the beginning of the game, the heroes are going to be picking their bat gadgets to equip, like batarangs or grappling hooks. And because they have to look through all those cards to decide what they're going to bring into a mission, they need to know what all of the icons on them mean. So that can really slow your startup when people don't know what those icons mean. The rulebook is woefully inadequate for teaching you the symbols. You can look them up in the back, but the way they're organized is not great for quickly finding what you need to know. I recommend printing off some player aids that have been provided online, both by some fans and separately by the creator, Monolith, because you really need those to be able to hand out to people just so they can quickly look through and find what it is their character or their equipment even does. It's designed to be language independent, so nothing in your components is really going to tell you what anything does. So you just need to know what these symbols mean. Once you get the hang of it, again, not too bad. But there are enough there that even once you play the game a few times, you'll probably still be looking at some of the same symbols, unless you just have a really, really good memory. The rulebook, not a massive fan of the rulebook. I know a lot of people online have complained about it. I feel like the specific things people complain about change because I don't know if it's immediately obvious why the rulebook doesn't work. The main problem with it is it's very slow to get you running on your first game. I spent a few hours over a couple of nights just reading through the rulebook, trying to understand what it was talking about. Some people blame translation issues. I don't think the issue is really translation. I felt like I could understand the English of it just fine. It was more that it gets really bogged down in specific flows of turns and actions. Like, it describes each possible action with like 8 different steps, with like this flow chart where you got some arrows going back up to previous steps, and it just does not work intuitively when you're first trying to read through it. I think the game really would have benefited from a quick start guide that would just say, hey, here is a simple scenario you can set up, and it just walks you through each step of that scenario. So here is exactly what the heroes do on their turn. Here's why they do it. Here's what the villain does. Here's why he does it. Here's how these skill icons are interacting. I think that would help quite a bit, because I find when I'm actually teaching people in real life how to play this game, I can teach them pretty quickly. You just prioritize what you're describing to them. So you say, these are your energy cubes, hoard these like gold, and everything you do uses 1 or more cubes. And here's how each action uses these cubes. And then here's where you can move. Here's how a combat works. Here's how a climb works. Here's how you do a skill check. And it's really not too bad to learn. And usually once I'm done explaining the rules, people know pretty well how to do it. So I know it's possible to explain this game well. And I just feel like the rulebook doesn't for new people. It's reasonably organized if you need to look things up, apart from the symbols. Those are still challenging. But if you need to look up, like, how does a ranged action work, it's not that bad. But I do feel like it could have used some passes with people who had never played the game, which they may have done, and they may have thought that was fine. But for me and for a lot of people I'm reading online, it just did not work. There is someone online I know who has put up a document on Board Game Geek that is kind of a concise, simplified version of the rules, and I think that one's actually pretty good if you just want a primer in how the game works. I recommend going and looking that up. Fortunately, the creators have been really responsive on forums when people have had rules questions. I've asked rules questions that they've answered pretty quickly. So at this point, if you need to look up a specific thing on Board Game Geek, you pretty much can. The community's pretty solid in having figured all this stuff out. But it's really kind of frustrating that you even have to rely on that, right? You want the rule book to make it very clear how things work. Like, if you want an example of really good rule books, I love Mind Clash's rule books for Anachrony and Cerebria. Like, those are really big, complex games. But the rule books are impressively free of ambiguity. And you can usually pretty quickly find what you need, well organized, both for looking things up and for initially learning the game. And I just kind of wish that same level of skill was involved in creating this rulebook. Because this is a case where I know a lot of people are going to have just a hard time getting into this game because of the rules. I've read online cases of people just deciding to just throw out the whole all-in Kickstarter because they were too frustrated trying to learn. And that should just not happen. There are video aids online that Monolith created. Like, that's very much to their credit. I've watched them. I still have trouble understanding how to play from those. But I know I personally also struggle to learn games for videos, so that may just be me. So enough about learning rules. Just know that's going to be a barrier. As I mentioned, the game really needs player aids. Fortunately, fans have created those. You can print those out. You should be good there as long as you're willing to put in that preparation, printing stuff out. The other big complaint I have is the game's balance. It doesn't feel solid, especially for new players. In general, the villain feels like he has a huge advantage. I've played several games as the villain. I think I've only ever seen the heroes win once. And in that game, there was somebody who's pretty smart guy who had played the game previously and was able to kind of push the other heroes to focus on the objectives and get things done. And that was also just the first scenario, which I feel like is probably more balanced than a lot of the others. Most of the games I've played, the villain just runs going away. Like, it felt like there was no chance for the heroes. I do know they had gotten caught up on fighting when they should have been focused on objectives, which is the main thing that's limiting. But it feels like even then, it feels like as the villain, you don't have to try that hard to win most of the time. Like in my games, like I'm not even really playing them that competitively when I play as the villain. I'm almost treating it more as more like an RPG where I'm the DM. Like it's a cooperative game. It's really about the heroes meeting a challenge and overcoming it more than it is really like I'm trying to outwit this group of people. So I'll pull my punches. I'll try not to be mean, but even then, I just win because it feels like things are just so in favor of the villain. That is also really frustrating because typically it's the person who owns the game and knows the game the best that's going to play the villain because that has the most stuff going on. But then if the heroes just feel like they can't do anything, it can make for a very difficult, unpleasant experience for them. So I haven't decided like what I think is a good fix for that without having actually modifying the scenarios themselves. There's a couple of house rules I've seen online that I think could be helpful. The one that I think is most promising is letting everybody just recover an extra cube every turn beyond what they normally would, and then they get more actions that they can perform and can get more stuff done. Because usually the problem is they just don't have enough time to do what they need to do. Alternately, you could give them extra turns. That would accomplish the same sort of thing. But I don't know. I mean, you hate having to house rule games to get them to be more fun, right? But this is a case where the game is just so much fun in general. Like, I'm complaining about these things, but this is because I like the basics of the game so much. Like, I think it flows super well. It's really thematic. Everybody I played it with, even when they've been losing, like, they still have tons of fun. And I just really want a good Batman game. And I think this game is really a pretty good Batman game. But the getting ramped up on the rules and just dealing with the scenario imbalances, these are legitimate obstacles. So this isn't a game you can really buy at retail. It was direct to Kickstarter. However, they are doing a relaunch in June with some new components as well. And I'm hoping they'll have some rulebook revisions. So if you're interested in the game, you can probably check it out then. I think it's June 4th is what their little flyer that came with my package said. And I'd suggest looking into that and seeing if this looks like a game for you. Just know you're going to have these issues to overcome. So overall, love the game. I rated it a 9 on Board Game Geek, so take that as you will. That's how much fun it is to play. But yeah. So hope you guys enjoyed this review. Hope you have a great day, and maybe see you guys later.